Well, you all are invited. Oh, thank you. Thank you for joining on from your busy schedule. So really appreciate you coming down here during the London Climate Action Week. So we are doing this event as part of the London Climate Action Week, and I cannot begin this event without thanking the lady there, Victoria, and London Chambers of Commerce and Industry. They provided us the space to conduct this event. So massive thanks to you. Massive thanks to all our panelists, and massive thanks to all of you again for coming down here. But before we start, I just want to basically give a quick view of what we're going to do. So we're going to explore how climate change is reshaping the world of sport, from the science and the stories to policy and the lived experiences of athletes. And before I invite our four panelists, I just want to basically dive into a special project which World Climate Athletes has been working on behind the scenes. It's basically a documentary that explores the intersection of sports and climate. And the question that we ask in that documentary is about, can the games we love survive on a changing planet? So that's a bigger question that we ask in that documentary. The documentary is currently a work in progress. Over the past few months, we have tried to capture a lot of stories from grassroots, sports communities, and also basically try to see how the natural arenas where we play sports has changed over the course of last few years. You can imagine how we have spoken about it in any large be a UN gathering, or be it a London Climate Action Week discussions that we had over the last few days, or be it the what we call as the SB meetings that happens in Bonn. How the melting ice brings to to all the water pollution or the river pollution that we have seen. So this documentary basically uncovers a new layer of challenge and how we can build that hope for the future of the sport. Fortunately today, I've got two creative minds who has been working on this documentary alongside myself, and I would like to request both of them to come on the stage and give a brief perspective of what that documentary is all about. So can I request Dan, you and Harry to please come on stage, please. Well, thank you so much. I'm just going to stand just for for the ease of convenience of handing over the mic to you both. Just briefly, could you please introduce yourself first, Dan, starting with you and then Harry.
Yeah, hi, my name's Dan Riley. I'm a freelance TV producer director. I recently made a documentary for TNT Sports about the effects of climate change on sport. And since then I've been working with Kishan on this project.
Thank you. My name's Harry Clark. I've been in the sustainability arena all my career for a long time now, since I've left university, and I used to work with Kishan, and I knew he always had a massive interest in climate change and sport, and seeing him sort of evolve and come up with these ideas, it's always been a bit of an inspiration. So when he called upon me, I always had an interest in climate change and sport as well. So that's where this began, and that's us.
Thanks you both for the introductions. Daniel, if I can ask you, you've been closely involved with the script and the structure of this documentary. If you could help us, walk through the concept of this documentary and give a brief overview of the 4 episodes that this documentary has.
Yeah. So the documentary is going to look at the complex relationship between sport and nature, and how the increasing impact on climate change is affecting that relationship. We want to explore what the impacts are on sport and athletes of climate change, what sport needs to do to adapt and change, and how it will have to adapt and change, and what is that future sport going to look like for our children and grandchildren. and we're specifically looking at four elements, four sort of elements of climate change, if you like, which are, in episode 1, we're going to look at the rhythm of the game. We're calling it the rhythm of the game. So we're going to look at the connections between athleticism, human athleticism, and the natural world. Episode 2, we're going to look at called Playing with Fire, which is going to look at the huge impacts of rising temperatures and the effect that's having on sportsmen and women, which is quite relevant at the moment with the FIFA Club World Cup happening in the United States under pretty intense heat. Episode 3, Water and the Will to Win. We'll look at rising sea levels and look at sports involving the sea. And then in episode 4, Fields Under Siege, we're going to look at the arenas and how the sort of playing fields, if you like, of sport are going to be affected by lack of water and also sometimes an excess of water. So that's kind of a sort of very general series overview.
Well, thanks for that insights, Dan. Harry, if I may ask you, what inspired you to get into this documentary in the first place? And is there any specific part of the documentary that, drives alongside your passion for getting involved here?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think for me it was a no-brainer to get involved in a documentary. All my life I've been involved in sport, be it athletics, swimming, even karting back in the day when I was younger. And I think over the years we're really seeing all these elements that you previously mentioned, Dan, coming into play in this field of sport, be it the intense heat, be it the pollution levels that you mentioned previously that we saw in the Seine and in the Paris Games last year. And I think it's really impacting how sports are being played and the future of sport. Now, sport for many is just seen as a competitive landscape. But for myself and many like us who are athletes ourselves, we know that sport isn't just competitive. It's about identity, it's about the future of generations, and it's about community globally. So I think really seeing the impact of that with some of my peers who are still heavily involved in marathon running and even some friends who are involved in high-level swimming, we're really seeing how that can be impacting people's lives and generations to come. So as someone who's been working in the sustainability space for many years now, I think this is a really powerful documentary that can really shine a light on this space and how we can sort of push forward for a brighter future to continue sports for future generations.
Perfect. That's indeed a powerful perspective too. I'm going to go back to Dan to ask, out of all the 4 episodes that he briefly shared, which one stands out and for him, and why is that? That's something that could resonate with the audience here. Just one out of the 4, if you can just briefly touch upon that.
Yeah, well, I thought with the current weather conditions, it's probably apt to choose the heat, and I think, as well as I mentioned briefly in my previous speech, that the FIFA World Club Championships, which is going on in America at the moment, and highlighting the fact that playing sport in extreme heat is something which is becoming increasingly difficult, and the effect on athletes is becoming increasingly prevalent, not just athletes but supporters watching games in 40 degrees heat, officials last year at the sort of American version of the continental championships, football championships out there. A linesman keeled over in Nashville when the temperatures were increasingly hot. I think that there's going to have to be serious look at the calendar, how these sporting events are scheduled. Next year we've got the actual Nations World Cup occurring in America, which is going to be happening in similar conditions. The thing that it's not just about the location, but it's the timing of the events. In America, they're behind Europe. Europe is the predominant TV market for the World Cup. and so scheduling those matches to a European audience, they have to kick off earlier when it's hotter. And so that's going to be something which is going to be a massive, huge problem. Even going forward, I'll go forward to the World Cup after that, 2030. That's scheduled to happen in Portugal, Spain, and Morocco in July. I don't really need to say anymore. So yeah.
Well, thanks, Dan, for that perspective, and thank you both for sharing your insights and for all the incredible work that that's been done to bring all these stories to life, especially the documentary that we've been working on. So really, thank you for your time. With that inspiration, let's turn into our panel discussion and let's dive deeper into the urgent question. So may I invite all my panelists on the stage, please. Pragnya, Ben, Navin, and Tanya. I believe she is not here yet. She's running behind. Okay, so we're gonna have three of you to begin with. Feel free to take any place. All right, thanks again for joining the panel. So, as I said, the goal will be to bring the perspective from the scientific community. We got Ben Santer here to the lived experience of athletes from Pragnya, and then we got the media experience from the global stories to the local stories and the local communities, how they get impacted because of climate change and how the sports is shaping up in those communities. May I first request Ben to introduce yourself, and then Pragnya, and then Navin, please.
So I'm Ben Santer. I'm a U.S. climate scientist, a little bit of an endangered species at the moment. I 30 years ago was the convening lead author for Chapter 8 of the second assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That report, back in November 1995, concluded famously with 12 words: the balance of evidence suggests a discernible human influence on global climate. And that was the first time that the international scientific community in 1995 spoke with one voice and said formally, we can identify a human-caused global warming signal. My life changed fundamentally after November 1995, and since then I've been trying to explain how we reached that finding, what the nature of the scientific underpinning of the discernible human influence conclusion was, and to emphasize the reality and seriousness of climate change. That's a tough sell, particularly in the current political environment in the United States, but it's just so critically important to live in the real world and to explain to people how and why climate is changing.
Hello everyone, I'm Pragnya Mohan. I am an Indian triathlete and I represented India at the Commonwealth Games. I've been a national champion for more than a decade now, and I've firsthand seen the effect of climate crisis on my sport of triathlon. Triathlon includes swimming, cycling and running, so it has given me a perspective on how it has made my life difficult, climate crisis. So that is why I think 2 years ago I decided that I need to use my platform to speak about it and to not only educate and encourage the other athletes, but also myself take actions so that my sport and all other sports can continue to be, and as athletes, as people, we can enjoy them.
Hi all, I'm Navin Singh Khadka. I'm an environment correspondent with the BBC World Service. It's been more than 3 decades now I've been reporting on this. Particularly, the international climate politics, and what does it mean for the global south? That's the main thing. Because all these negotiations, diplomacy, politics, negotiations, the global south struggles to understand what does it mean for them what is it coming, what is coming their way, and that is what I try to decipher and take it down to those people out there. I report in 5 languages, and these days it's multimedia, so tele, radio, online, socials, 1200 word story in text, in TikTok, 60 seconds. Thank you.
I mean, you report on 5 channels, and do you also report 5 earth elements then?
Yes.
So we got 5 earth elements: heat, fire, and water. We covered fire, water, and air, and then we got soil and sky. So you cover everything in those 5 channels. Wow, interesting. We're going to kick off on our discussion here. To start, let's look at how climate change is leaving its mark on the natural world and how that is affecting sport. So I'm going to start off with Ben first, yourself, about all the research that you have done, and you've been very kind also to work with us on the heat, modeling, heat stress modeling as well. But we'll keep that aside for now. But the research that you have been doing has clearly shown how human activity leaves a distinct fingerprint on our planet's climate. From your perspective, what's the most striking ways you see these changes affecting natural environments where sport takes place? It could be anything to do with rising temperatures, or shifting seasons, or extreme weather events as such. So, any perspective if you'd like to share on that?
So my job is to use pattern information to fingerprint the climate system. So to use geographical patterns of information or patterns through the ocean or through the atmosphere from the surface right up to 50 kilometers above it to disentangle human and natural effects on climate. And that work back in 1995 led to this discernible human influence conclusion. Scientists around the world do this fingerprinting of the climate system. That discernible human influence conclusion in 1995 was controversial. A lot of powerful individuals, companies, and even countries didn't like it because it said we might have to change the way we do business. And one of the criticisms was you folks are only looking at temperature. Maybe there is some human fingerprint in temperature, but look in moisture, look in clouds, look in atmospheric circulation, look in the ocean, look at extreme events, intensity, frequency, duration. And that's what the scientific community did for the last 30 years with pattern information, and increasingly has shown that in literally dozens of different observables in the ocean, on the land surface, in the atmosphere, the patterns of change that we see can't be explained by natural causes. The most parsimonious explanation has to involve a strong human influence on climate. How does that affect sports? It affects it in so many ways. Climate is the backdrop against which everything you've talked about, swimming, mountain climbing, skiing, winter sports, you name it, is going to take place. And we're changing that backdrop, that proscenium. I think one of the most important ways that will affect sport is in extreme events. So a lot of work in my world looks at changes in heat stress, in extreme rainfall, and we've been able to show collectively as a community that there are discernible human influences, not only in broad brush average climate, but in the behavior of extreme events that, as was mentioned by Dan in terms of the Club World Cup and many other sporting events in summertime, but also winter sports, will affect the viability of the event itself.
Thanks, Ben. While climate is a black backdrop, I believe science is the bedrock of all foundation. And the way, science, prove itself wrong and celebrate its success. So every time it just prove itself wrong, it's basically celebrating its success for the better one. So the better, research and findings. and really thankful for that insightful points, Ben. So building on that, let's hear from Pragnya as to what she feels about from her any moment from her career when she saw up close as to how this nature changes that we spoke about or the extreme event, how this directly impacted her ability to train and compete.
So thank you so much. I've had the privilege to be able to train abroad. I'm training currently in Bath. I've trained in Australia. I've trained in Spain. I've competed literally across the world. And I've seen so many different kind of weather conditions, climate conditions. But to start with, I come from a place called Ahmedabad, which is in a state of Gujarat in India. And the temperatures there, 8 out of 12 months, are about 30 degrees Celsius at 7 a.m. in the morning. So if I have to do an outdoor training, which is most of my training, has to be before 7 a.m. I have to finish by 7 a.m. Apart from that, all my training have to be indoors. And the air pollution, I think Indian air pollution, all of you must be aware of, is so bad. So when you talk about a level playing field for athletes coming from countries like mine, it is so difficult. I mean, we don't get adequate conditions to train in, then how are we supposed to perform? And it's not just about performance, it's actually dangerous to train in those conditions. And to be very precise, I have firsthand, I was racing in 22 in Kenya for an African Cup, and the temperature was 35 degrees Celsius, the humidity was 80%, and during the entire triathlon, I think 80% plus athletes fainted by the time they reached the finish line, and I was one of them. And it was alarming to see that such an event could happen. And then often we find that organizers prioritize sponsors and their time, like when they want the events to happen. So in one particular event back in India, we had to start at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, which is the peak temperature, and the temperature was upwards of 45 degrees Celsius. And I think only 10% athletes made it to the finish line, and I was among the ones who didn't. So those conditions, when you have to race under those conditions, train in those conditions, I mean, you can't expect performance or even adequate training.
I think you've set the stage quite well for me to bring Navin into this conversation. Thank you for sharing all those perspectives. And it is quite difficult for any athlete if the environment is not conducive for you to get the right level of training. It's very difficult for you to expect high level of performance, and that's one of the reasons why some of the subcontinent countries are not doing good in terms of getting those Olympic medals in some of these outdoor games. Comparatively to the Western world, could be some research topic in future. But let me bring in Navin. And Navin, you come from the Himalayan belt, if I may say so, and you bring a different perspective, and you bring a unique lens to this discussion as such. So with what Pragnya basically laid the foundation. Could you please share some, how climate change, especially in the Himalayan and other regions as such, has affected traditional sports of the communities that depend on them? So, if you could share something on that, please.
Thanks. So, apart from the temperatures, like the heat wave and heat, of course, it's very, very important and it's going to impact. I was just remembering the last Olympics, if you remember. Some athletes were tweeting, back then Twitter was still prestigious, and that they had special individual ACs supplied to them. And then other athletes were saying, oh, that's disadvantage to us, it's so difficult. So heat apart, I think it's also the place, where is it? And if you ask me where is it, anywhere it could happen. So you talked about the Himalayas or any other mountain ranges, be it Andes or the Alps or even in the Rockies, wherever, or even in Australia, New Zealand. What we're seeing is because of these, accelerating temperature rise, as we all know, especially in the mountain region, the glaciers, the snow-filled ice packs, snowpacks, they're all vanishing. And I don't just talk about glaciers and glacial lakes nowadays. That's something we've been hearing for many, many years now. The story has moved on. What I think is, because of all this, retreating glaciers, vanishing ice packs, snowfield, and so on and so forth, I think it's like cement, going away from a building, from a house. So when you don't have the cement, then all those building blocks, they crumble down. So now, this is about mountains coming down. It's not just about glaciers retreating or, we'll have water scarcity, how hydropower plants will run dry and so on and so forth. It's not just that. If you look at what's happening in these areas, just recently in the Alps we saw what happened in Britain. So that's it. It's a familiar story. So then what happens is when mountains start coming down, what happens to those activities then? I've done a couple of stories on that. For example, mountaineering, for instance. Mountaineering is severely, severely impacted. I talk to those mountain guides, the Sherpas, for instance, very, very closely. They are called icefall doctors. I'm sure you've heard about them. They are the ones who fix the ropes and ladders before you start climbing. So when you talk to them, they will not say so many things in public because they know that will threaten their business. But when they talk to me, then they explain how dangerous it is now compared to what it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Because even they are saying mountains are coming down because the cement is missing. So all those boulders, all those rocks, mountains coming down, literally. Yeah. And then similarly, it doesn't stay there. So when mountains come down, what they also do is they block river systems, for example, downstream. And the river systems, when they are blocked, the rivers become massive lakes. And then they burst out. So this is called the cascading effect, downstream. So what happens, in a sense, rafting, for example. So this is a story I did from Venezuela, for instance. Venezuelans were telling me how rafting is impacted. The business is down. Spain, on the other hand, because of the heat, rafting again, water level way, way, way down. And fungus, water fungus, shooting up. Everybody is suffering from fungus. So you see, it's the temperature also, and also location. Where is it happening? And oceans, I don't have to tell you, we have very, very scary stories from oceans coming up. And let me tell you, the reading, just when ocean is warming so dangerously, and we don't know so much what's happening, but what I'm being told is the study is actually going down. I'm not just talking about Noah cuts, the Trump, effects. Even before him, the cuts on the studies from ship or other vessels or things like that, it's actually going down, and that is quite worrying. So location is also very important.
Well, thank you for sharing some of those local stories. And if you've not been to Mount Everest and base camp, better go it earlier than it still remains as the Mount Everest that we know. So yeah, thanks for that. And thanks for bringing that, both the global and the local perspective into it. I really appreciate that. We're not going to focus, we basically understand, this particular first set of round that climate change is definitely impacting us and us means the sport industry, the sports and the sports fans at large. We got all the scientific, evidence as well. Now let's turn to see how the sport and its communities are responding to these, to these changes and what more could be done in this space. I'm going to go back again to you, Ben, and probably ask you a question around the climate fingerprint work that you have done, how that could help sports organization and event planners, especially what Pragnya mentioned that they've been forced to play on a specific time because of the sponsorship thing. But is there any element that science could bring to make these organizations and event planners make them more smarter about the risk and that that the athletes face in this space, and how they could basically adapt to the environmental changes as such. If you could throw some light on it, and also some of the work that you've been doing on the thought experimentation research as well. If you could throw some light. I'm just combining a couple of things here, but if you could, share some perspective as to how sports organization could benefit from science.
Well, we have a boatload of computer models of the climate system. These are now complex Earth system models that include the atmosphere, the oceans, sea ice, the carbon cycle, atmospheric chemistry, very, very complex things that inform us about the climatic shape of things to come, what we might expect to see over this century in response to different scenarios of energy use, population growth, technological development, collaboration between nations. And those models, not surprisingly, differ in terms of some of their projections about the changes in temperature, moisture that we might expect. But there's also a lot of stuff that's robust. It's going to warm as we continue to burn fossil fuels and increase levels of heat-trapping greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The warming is going to have seasonal signatures and spatial signatures too. Greater warming over land than over ocean, because land and ocean have different heat capacities. Greater warming over the Arctic than at low latitudes because of so-called amplifying feedback mechanisms associated with the disappearance of snow and ice as you warm. When you melt them, they expose darker underlying land and ocean surfaces. Those darker surfaces absorb more incoming heat, melt back more snow and sea ice. So there's a lot of stuff we understand about the expected changes in climate and where they will be, how large they might be. And to me, one of the key things is to look at sites, the sites of major sporting events, to figure out how well have these models that we're using for making projections into the future captured what actually happened in terms of the temperature, the moisture changes, not only their size, but also their seasonality. There's a lot of stuff that could and should be done to figure out which of these models are the most reliable for trying to understand the climatic shape of things to come. That's critically important. Continuing to monitor, as you mentioned, is important. Monitoring is imperiled. In the United States, unfortunately, we're likely to turn off existing satellites that tell us a lot about global changes in surface temperature, atmospheric moisture, ocean temperature, which will degrade not only our understanding of the size of current changes in climate, but will also degrade weather forecasts, which are critical components of sporting events. So I think a lot of work could be done, again, in terms of looking at computer model forecasts of projected changes in climate through the lens of sporting events, where and when, and which models might be most reliable for informing us about the expected future.
Yeah, and just I'm just going to ask a follow-on on that. Do you think that is the sporting organization doing enough to engage the scientific community? And do you think that they should set up something specialized, a special community just before the event to engage the scientific community and take those as just as a research of what you have already done so far as as an input to take their to prepare better. But is there some engagement going on by likes of IOA, FIFA, ICC, or Rugby Federation? Anyone has engaged with any scientific community across the globe that you are aware of?
I'm not a good person to answer that question, and based on what Navin already said about the awarding of the World Cup to the United States now upcoming, and to Portugal, Spain, and Morocco, and Saudi Arabia later. It seems like not a lot of thought has been given to athletes and their well-being under a changing climate. So from my perspective, what is critically important is to have some communication between climate scientists like me, athletes involved, and the host organizations. You know, climate science has arguably not been particularly effective in alerting people to the reality and seriousness of climate change, at least not in the United States. We need partners. We need folks in different worlds, like the world of sport, to provide a different perspective on how what they do has been affected by climate change. And I'm willing to participate in any kind of discussions like that, whether they're whether they're happening now in a systematic way, I don't know.
Well, thanks for sharing that opinion. I think there's always some sort of an opportunity here to engage the scientific community. I'll try to make some inroads, and thanks for offering that that you're willing to engage on that particular theme. Thanks again. I'm going to move to you, Pragnya, and I just would like you to share your experiences at the Paris Olympic, the triathlon, which was disrupted by water pollution. How did that experience shape your view of the connection between athlete safety, public health, and the need for a cleaner, natural environment? You touched upon it previously, but if you could share more about that particular experience that you lived just a couple of years ago.
So I think the Paris Seine River, they spent almost $1.5 billion on cleaning that river, and in spite of that, the men's triathlon event was delayed by a day. And when such an event happens, like at the Olympic Games, which is the epitome of any games for athletes like me, and then you think that even the most elite level competitions are not immune from the environmental consequences of the environmental damage that we are doing. And that brings into a perspective that pollution, we think that air pollution, water pollution is a distant reality, whereas when you are standing on the start line of an event and the river is too toxic to swim in, it comes very personal and close. So I think at the Paris Games, it was the hottest games. It was the most, the Seine River, the cleaning of the Seine River was highlighted. In spite of that, the delay in the event, it caused a lot of confusion to start with, because the men's event and the women's event was a day apart. And when they delayed the men's event, there was a lot of confusion whether the event will happen or not, because in triathlon there is a leeway that you can skip the swim if the water quality does not match the levels that it should, or if the sea level is too high, or there are disruptions. So there was a lot of confusion whether triathlon will happen or not. And triathlon was one of the showcase events at the Paris Games. Because the backdrop was such iconic places in Paris. And when as an athlete I look at that, it definitely wakes you up. It's a waking call. And 1 year before that event, there was a Paris trial that happened in the same venue, and swimming was not, because of the high E. coli levels in the Seine River, swimming was not there, and it was turned into a duathlon event. And we thought that is what will happen at the Olympic Games, which if it was to happen, would have been a shame at the Games itself, because they spent so much time and effort in cleaning it, and the everyone who was involved wanted it to be clean. But such events are becoming a routine instead. Now in other competitions as well, we are often faced with a high level of the sea pollution, the water does not match the levels, and we are seeing that triathlon events are converting into duathlon events. And coming from an Indian perspective, I think a lot of lakes and rivers in my country are polluted, and we do not have the luxury to choose the fields that we play in, and we are forced to kind of swim in those rivers. So I think it is a wake-up call that as athletes, as sports federations, we need to take efforts and make sure that water pollution and air pollution are less, otherwise our sport might just cease to exist.
And if there's one action that you would want people to take, a sports fan who's watching you, just one action, what would that be for reducing air pollution or limiting water pollution? One action.
One single most effective action I think is not using a single-use plastic. Like the federations or as fans, not using single-use plastic and bringing your own bottle that you can refill and drink from.
That's the power of one action, because sports has been watched by roughly 80% of the global population base. Now we're talking about 6 billion people taking just one action. So it's 6 billion actions on the day. So that makes a huge difference when we just take one action. We don't have to move into EV, move into empty our pockets. Just one action is what is the need of an hour. I'm going to move Navin to you. Thanks, Pragnya, for that insight. You covered about the local and the global policy, the grassroots and the global stage. From the work that you have done for the BBC, and sharing the perspective of those burqa and what they call gurkhas, right? What's that one example of a policy or the local initiative that's actually made a positive impact on sport specifically, or any outdoor recreation in a climate affected area? Just one story of any policy that has made that impact.
Well, I will struggle to answer that because there's hardly any, to be honest. The thing is, what we call this adaptation thing, it's a major gap in particularly developing or poor countries. As you know, the climate discourse is broadly divided into two things: mitigation, that is about bringing down your emissions, and adaptation is about living with all those impacts, inevitable impacts, lessening the threats, lessening the damages. But when it comes to poor countries or developing world, that is hardly happening. There might be some examples. I'm not saying there might be some examples, but there are quite unique. Totally I won't see that happening mainstream. No. And so as a result, what happens is, what's happening here is mountaineering. Let's talk about that. That's something I've been covering for many years now. So do I see mountaineers being trained in the context of climate change? They read all these stories. I have done so many stories. What's happening in the Himalayan region? What's happening elsewhere? Have they factored in all these things in their training, in their mountaineering, whatever schools and all that? No. If you go and talk to those guides, they will just talk to you in broadly what they have been taught traditionally, but they will just give you the observations of what's happening now. But are they trained in that context? So, the crevasses anytime coming down, or widening crevasses, for example. How do you deal with those widening crevasses? Or seracs coming down, and how do you deal with that? Camp 2 on Everest, Camp 2. This is the chairperson of Nepal's, Guides Association telling me. There's a stream flowing down Camp 2. Camp 2. All right? So, but then they say all that. They've been saying that for many years now. But what's being done about it? Has it been factored in for training and all that? No. Talk to rafters, Has it been factored in? No. So that reflects a bigger picture that in these particularly developing world, adaptation is hardly happening. And the figures. We all know the figures. Whatever climate finance has been made available, the lion's share, big chunk, almost all of it, very tiny little bit goes to adaptation, all of it is going for mitigation. And yet we were seeing, emissions still going up. You know the figures, he will tell you the figures and all that, but we all know that it's been a fiasco. So adaptation is a big gap, and in sports, it's the same story. If you insist on, well, do I know anything? Well, yes, I mean, the planners, like the same icefall doctors, what I mentioned earlier, who prepare the routes, yeah? They kind of sometimes talk to scientists and talk to weather experts and say, which route should we go, eastern reach, western reach, what do we do? This is ad hoc. But the proper adaptation planning, it reflects when the whole country is not doing proper adaptation, sports, Like the latest climate plan, it's called the NDCs. I'm sure you've heard about it, or if you know, it's called Nationally Determined Contribution, whatever the jargon means. So they are being submitted to the UNFCCC. All these countries, these poor countries, if you look at it, almost 80% of that document is devoted to mitigation, so to say, how to cut down emissions. You look at adaptation, there's hardly anything there, hardly anything. And that, it kind of bewilders me that there are so much of impacts. And yet, why are we not talking about adaptation? This country's climate change committee, by the way, has warned that even this country is not preparing in terms of adaptation. So think what might be happening in those poor countries.
Well, that's a brilliant perspective. I just want to check very selfishly whether the cricket grounds in Nepal would stay, because we got a tour in January next year. Yeah, Paul is arranging a tour for us in next year to Nepal. Are they going to stay there that way? Or are we going to have a changing cricketing landscape there? Are we going to play cricket in a different way? But thanks for sharing that perspective. I believe the role of storytelling is very important in all these conversation. And sometimes we use some heavy jargons which a layman or a sports fan, like we have 8 billion people across the globe, may not be able to understand or relate to. And so my basically question to you, Ben, is some of the people may not be able to connect what that the climate science and their favorite games, how they are basically mapped or connected as such. What's that one message that you would like to share from your research that they would be able to understand and protect their favorite game, if that's something that you would could touch upon, please?
Sure, thank you. Well, in addition to being a climate scientist, I'm also a climber. I started over 50 years ago at the University of East Anglia in Norwich, not the world's most mountainous terrain. But joining the Climate Club at UEA took me all over the world. It took me to the Himalayas, to the Juneau ice field in Alaska, and over one lifetime, over those 50 years, I witnessed profound changes in the glaciers of the world. Some of the glaciers I stood on as a kid with my dad, the Großglockner in Austria, for example, are almost gone. And what I do in order to try and connect with people and tell them I'm not just a climate scientist. At the end of my public talks about fingerprinting and the science and climate models, I show pictures. I show them the places that I've seen, photographs that I've taken over those 50 years, and how profoundly things that I love have changed. I find that connects with people in a way that the pure science alone does not do, because there's a shared bond there. These places have value for many people. They understand the beauty, they understand the transience too, how rapidly these things are changing. And of course, not only beautiful, fragile, high alpine environments, but coral reefs, and oceans, many environments we are changing on our watch. So the message to try and connect with people is this is not only a science problem, it's also a problem about values. What kind of world do we want to live in? What kind of world do we want to give to future generations? And I find that that's valuable for having conversations about the the what kind of world we all want to have, irrespective of political or religious affiliations or familiarity with the science. We all have some say in what kind of world we ultimately want to live in and want our kids and grandkids to live in.
Thanks. Thanks, Ben, for that. And pictures convey 1,000 words. So it's always good, to leverage that to show what it was to what it is today. Again, sticking to the storytelling, part of it, Pragnya, you definitely, you have inspired young athletes across the globe and made them to think about sustainability, especially in the subcontinent, especially in the India region as such. If you were to give one advice to them about balancing ambition with environmental responsibility and how they can use their platform to protect the places they love, like any cricketing, any sporting field, what would that be?
So I think inspiring the next generation is very important, and one thing that I would want to tell them is that your ambition and, like Ben said, the values can coexist. It does not mean that you cannot be an elite athlete, you have to take a sponsorship from fossil fuel companies. You can stand your values and you can say and shape how your career looks like. Like saying no to fossil fuel sponsorship from a country like mine is very hard because they are the main sponsors for sporting people in my country. But I did that, and so can they. And there will be alternative forms of sponsorships available. So I think that is very important. Then obviously encouraging them to use cycle as mode of transportation, public transport wherever it is available, not using single-use plastic, kind of also making their clubs and associations answerable and accountable for their sustainable practices. I think that is also integral, a part of the entire conversation, because if federations don't encourage the use of sustainability in sports, athletes can do very little on their own. But if a group of athletes come together and they make their federation accountable, I think that will start a conversation. And then obviously, like I have launched my my own project in India with International Olympic Committee, so they can do something similar. Like my project, I'll just speak a bit about my project. It's called Ek Beti Ek Cycle, which means one daughter, one cycle, in which we are giving girls cycles so that they can be in education and continue their education by cycling to their school, which is in another village. Otherwise, 60% of girls have to drop out because they are not able to go to the other village to get education. And we are sourcing these cycles through private schools in the city and refurbishing it and giving it to the girls. And so there is a recycling involved and there's cycling involved. So I think a project like these, and then athletes have to understand if they love the field, the mountains, the swimming pools, or anything else, it would cease to exist, because if the nature is not there, environment and is not there, we wouldn't be able to play anymore. Like, forget about being competitive athlete, just for fun. It would cease to exist. So I think it is not an optional that as athletes we need to use our platforms, but it is now a necessity.
Well, thanks for sharing that inspiring story and inspiring work that you're doing, especially in India. And I can very much relate to what you're saying, and it is need of an hour there. So really appreciative of what you're doing there. Navin, on the same story, telling front, I'm just going to go back again to that same narrative that we've been speaking about, especially if there's one story that you would want to illustrate about how the local action has rippled out to inspire a global action, what would that be?
Well, there are like isolated examples where people have tried. And that's why this narrative now, for example, indigenous, community people, what they're doing, and what can we learn from them. That is one example, for example, yeah. Well, I've kind of tried to cover positive stories in that how they are trying to do it. I can't remember exactly in sports, but it could resonate with what somebody. So last year with the BBC 100 Women, I'm sure you're aware of this season that we do every year, BBC 100 Women, and last year was climate change, the theme. So I did a number of stories for them, and one of them was about how women conservationists are helping wildlife to live with climate impacts. So in that, I had 3 examples to showcase. One was this woman conservationist from Uganda who was helping gorillas because the drought is very severe there and water is a huge issue for gorillas, and how she's been helping these gorillas to cope with that. And similarly in Nepal, for instance, there's one woman who's helping pangolins. Pangolins are the most poached animals now in the world. So how she is helping pangolins survive wildfire. Wildfire is a big thing nowadays, 1,000 spots. NASA will show you on one day, 1,000 spots in a small country like Nepal. Can you imagine that? In Tibet, in Nepal, in India, in Bhutan, so on and so forth. So she is helping pangolins, how to survive wildfires. Similarly, another woman conservationist from Pacific Islands, Solomon Islands, for instance, she's kind of helping those leatherback turtles, because of the temperature rise, the sand, the beach sand, it's so hot that the eggs, when they hatch, because of the temperature, they all, hatch as female turtles. So there's a massive issue about there'll be no male turtles. So what these conservationists do is they wait for the whole night or wee hour in the morning and see where are those eggs being laid, and then they carry those eggs to some cool places, up there, so that to make sure that there are male turtles. So that kind of story, the local story about how you can do it. In the same fashion, the Sherpa community, for example, tell me how could mountaineering also be made safe from their limited knowledge. But again, it's a bigger story. The story is very, very big. I'm sure that there can be an amalgamation between the bigger picture and those local stories. But is it happening? By and large, I'm sorry to say, no.
Well, thanks for being honest. I mean, you have the first-hand information, and that is what we expect, to get the real information. I'm going to open up the floor for question. We're going to go in first. Yeah, please.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for such an important panel. I'm very excited to hear about the documentary. I think for me, what I want to understand in your thoughts is how we get over this cognitive dissonance. So as someone who is on a lifelong mission to encourage her husband, who is a huge sports fan, to really take the impacts of climate change seriously. He's married to me, so I tell him all the time, but I'm the wrong messenger. I am dying for someone in the sports world to really reach out and talk to him, but it's not there. Nobody's talking about it in sports. It's he needs to hear it from his football team, from the celebrities, and no one in football's doing that. No one at West Ham is doing that. So I just wanted to understand, how do we get them? Like, we're all here because we know there's a problem. How do we get this cognitive dissonance of people just? My husband doesn't believe me that it's going to be this bad.
We want those sports ambassadors to now become planet ambassadors, and I completely relate to you. We need a lot of those, steward of this game to basically come forward and do it in their respective game. For example, Pat Cummins has been doing it in cricket. You have a lot of other cricketers doing it, especially for cricket, so they know, and they've been spreading that message across. I'm sure there are a lot of footballers as well doing that, but we'll have to get someone from West Ham specifically, so that we change the mind and trigger that action. Anyone wants to add on to that question? Response?
I think last year there was a sponsorship that was there with FIFA from Saudi, which was fossil fuels, and there was a huge a letter written by 100 female footballers to FIFA, and it was only after that went viral because of, thanks to BBC, did the male footballers do anything about it. So I think there is still, like I said, sponsorship versus your career versus your values. So I think there's still a bit of that between the athlete and them speaking up, but it's slowly and steadily getting there.
Well, thank you. There's one question. We'll go sequential, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we'll take one more if there's time left. Yeah, you go on, please, sir.
Thanks very much. I run a company called Global Sustainable Sport. So we produce a weekly newsletter that talks about who's doing what around the world. And actually it's quite difficult to find things in Asia, to be honest. We've had a little bit from Japan, but not very much. So I'd love to talk to you a bit more about what's happening. But we just did an assessment of the Premier League. Sadly, West Ham were quite low way down on the assessment. There were only 3 clubs in the Premier League who put climate as a risk in their annual financial reports, which I think says a lot about what's happening. So I think it would be really interesting to know how we connect all of your kind of 3 initiatives into conversations, because I think it is communication, and that's kind of what we're doing. We're trying to look at 500,000 companies in the sports industry and see how we can inspire 6 billion people to follow what they're doing, but they're not doing it. And we've analysed about 2,000 sports organisations so far, and only 5% of them have got a climate strategy or even promote something on their side. So it's very low, but I think it is the athlete. Pragnya, I saw you at Bases last year, so it was interesting. And I was just going to say, are you seeing anything happening in triathlon at all? Because there's bits, but not much, I don't think.
At the world level, I think World Triathlon does have sustainable practices, and now they have done away with single-use plastic bottles that we used to get at events earlier. So I think they're taking steps, but it's very slow. I think they need to get up and do more about it. But at the IOC level, I think there is a lot more happening. They are very committed to making their games sustainable, and hence when IOC says something, the other world federations have to take care of it. So I think it is happening, but very slowly. That is what I would say. And the conversations, like as athletes, we are not encouraged to have that conversation at all. And there is no education on that front as well. Like, for instance, like with anti-doping, we have an entire, we have to go through education every 3 months. What dope, what new drugs have been added to the list, how you can be, potentially someone else can dope you. So things like that. So I think something like that has to be started by the federations at the world level, which is mandatory to a certain extent, so that athletes are forced to kind of do it at first.
Very well said. I think very well said. I think we need to have those policies to ensure that some of the private institutions also follow that suit. Especially the likes of some of the football clubs. They may not be they may not be compliant, or they may not be regulated to do anything like that. But if you bring that into it, if you bring those sort of a policy about like doping, what we have, if you bring that in every sport at every level, be it at the federation or be it at the private level, that would be something interesting to drive that, galvanize that change and drive that change. Yes, please.
Why is it not being discussed? I mean, to that point, I think in sizable number of countries, what I've seen is it's also the government's policy. So the government deliberately don't encourage different quarters. They don't encourage this discourse to come out in a proper way, and as a result, the sports, again, like sports in many countries, still particularly in developing countries, it's within the sports ministry, political influences. So if it's a no-go, it's a no-go area. You don't talk about it, because it's the official policy. You don't want to talk about it. And now, particularly also, in the wake of Trump's administration, for example. So if there are countries that are receiving American fund assistance, for instance, it's a no-brainer that there will be influences. So yes, it mirrors what the government thinks.
I'm Richard Hello. I'm a cricketer in the twilight of a career that never really had a dawn. I'm also a cricket historian. I've just delivered the manuscript of a new history of cricket, from the beginning. The last chapter is called Planet Stopped Play. There will be an inspection in 2030, and it predicts that the history of cricket may actually be over. Cricket is the first major global sport that may be extinguished by climate because it's the most threatened by climate change, because it's the most threatened by adverse weather and atmospheric conditions. 6 billion, we've had this figure of 6 billion sports fans, and a great deal of them, a great number of them. Cricket is the second most popular sport in the world. What I wanted to ask the panel is, when are these people, when are sports lovers going to be mobilised as a political force? When are they're a huge voting bloc in every country, especially the Indian subcontinent as far as cricket is concerned. When is somebody going to get up and say, your sport is extinguished if these policies continue?
It's a very good question. Bringing the sports, bringing the political element, and especially, a lot of those sports fans are basically going to be voting and keep, hitting the button there. So it's going to make a lot of difference on the ground. Anyone wants to take that?
I don't know about cricket in particular, but just an interaction that I had with Chelsea Football Club Sustainable Head last year. I think they are trying to educate their fans through a sustainable policy that they have come across, and trying to tell them to take the public transport instead of coming in private cars for the matches. And they're incentivizing that through some goodies, through some free tickets that they are giving away, a kind of thing. So I think that was a very interesting fact that he told me, that I asked him the same thing, that how are you influencing the fans, because players and athletes are limited, the fan following is much bigger. So that is what he told me. But I, coming from the Indian subcontinent, like you mentioned, that politics is a big thing, like the political agenda, the policies, and BCCI is very politically influenced in India. And
So is the ICC.
Yes.
The ICC is in India, FIFA.
Yes. So I think when there's an alignment there, then the conversation will happen. Otherwise, as of coming from the Indian subcontinent, I can say the conversation is pretty limited. Last year, for the first time, we had a sports and sustainability conference, and yes, we had it in Leh, and it was not the most spectacular conference that I've been to, and there was a lot of greenwashing going on. There was a fossil fuel company just green logoed as the sponsor, so you can imagine the conversation level.
That basically, go ahead, Navin.
Quickly, apart from the
Very interesting question.
apart from the politics, the global politics, regional politics, national politics, and so on, what I've also seen is, I think there's this understanding or misunderstanding or whatever it is, that if you talk about it, then you are shooting on your own foot. I mean, if you talk about, for example, mountaineers, if they really keep on talking about what climate change is doing to Everest and how risky it is, and that means that means people will stop going there. And I've been told about it's not just there, elsewhere as well. Talk about for example, sports in desert countries. Yeah. So dust storms, for example, massive issue nowadays. Yeah. But then, in private conversation, everybody admits that, it's a major issue. But then do you see them talking in public? Do you see them? No. If you talk that, nobody's going to be there. No, don't do that. Don't do that. But that's the thing. You see, the short-term benefit, long-term.
Yeah, maybe, but we also have to do a lot, to basically talk to our MPs, our political leaders, just to let them know that these are the sports that we love, and if you're not able to, do a good policy, if you're not able to put good policy in your respective parliaments, then that game may cease to exist. And so, voting to you as well. That's something that we should press our MPs and our political leaders to do so. On that note, I'll have to there's one more question, right? You had, sorry.
Sure. I'm sorry. I'll be brief. I know we're past time. Thank you for a great panel. And I'm in climate science myself, and so I appreciated, especially Ben, you're in climate science, and you touched on how the science is there, but it's the storytelling that's really powerful, and that pushes the right messages. And I wanted to kind of build on the point that you made about just the role that these major athletes that have such a tremendous following have in driving meaningful change. And you were talking about how 10% of people can finish a triathlon, not because they're not good athletes, but because the climate is not capable of sustaining what they need for running and swimming and biking. And I'm wondering, we touched on how, sponsorships and getting people to talk about these issues. I hope that's not the only path. Like, my question really is that, do you think, for all of you, is there potential for these athletes to come forward in their own right, to be like, I'm witnessing this change myself, and I want my fans to listen to it, and I want my fans to support this mission because my team is struggling, and we're gonna see this continuing to be exacerbated. I'm wondering if you think that it has, a lot of the times it's all about the money, and I need the sponsorship to talk about this. Do you think that is going to be the case as we continue to see these changes worsening and worsening, or is there some hope for these athletes to come forward in their own right and be like, my sport is struggling, we need this attention?
Yeah, so what's the hope for the future sport? Anyone like to take that?
Do you want to? Okay.
Just a few thoughts. So in the US, there's this organization called Protect Our Winters, and they do involve a lot of mountaineers, skiers, and climate scientists as well. And it's proved to be an effective means, I think, for athletes to speak about the reality and seriousness of climate change. That's the thing we need more of, and we need creative partnerships between scientists and not only folks in sport, but also storytellers. I mean, one of the things that has happened here in London until the beginning of May was Kyoto, this play by the RSC and Good Chance that was about international climate negotiations and the scientific finding of a discernible human influence on global climate. That reached audiences I could never hope to reach as a scientist. That's what we need, coalitions of the willing, folks who want to get across the fierce urgency of now and what our choices are and what we risk if we do nothing to address the problem of human-caused climate change. So creative partnerships, and Kishan, thank you for your leadership in trying to build those creative partnerships, and thanks to both of you for speaking about those kind of partnerships from different perspectives.
Yeah, go on please.
I just want to add, as an athlete perspective, the dilemma that I had before I started publicly speaking about it was that I travel a lot. I fly a lot because of my sport. I have to travel across continents, and a ridiculous amount of traveling is involved. So I had this dilemma as an athlete that, okay, if I speak about it, people will question that you travel a lot, you don't even stay in your country for half the year. What are you speaking about? So I think there has to be a proper education. I was fortunate enough, I'm a part of a US-led organization called Eco Athletes. We are about 200 champions, from across the world trying to talk about sustainability in the sport. And there are various organizations now coming up in different parts of the world, and where you can be a part and you can get educated. But I think, I would want to see the federations taking a lead on this. Now United Nations, in the last COP that I was a part of, they had a conversation. They want to start a sports, they want to start a sports arena where athletes can be educated about it more, and so they can use their platforms, like you rightly said, like when Ronaldo kind of substitutes Coca-Cola bottle for water, the Coca-Cola share prices go down. So that is the power of an athlete, and we need to use that for the climate conversation. But because of this dilemma and the limited education that we have, I think that's the problem. But that is where the intersection of science and athletes can come forward.
Just super quickly, and this, one thing what I'm told is if influencers could do that, but they are under pressure, but not speaking so much using those terminologies, then I'm kind of told by some experts that sometimes you can tell climate change stories without mentioning the word climate change.
By the way, it is changing in France because the new law has been put in France just this week, wherein if any influencer is promoting non-sustainable product, they might be subject to some regulations as well. So France has taken that step, by the way. So.
Can I just say something really quickly to end on a positive note?
Yes, of course. Please go on. I mean, I can always hand over the mic. Yeah, please go on. I mean.
So I work for an organisation called Counter Sim, and we create these radical partnerships to promote positive climate action to mass audiences. And we're just doing a project which is in Brazil, which is around football, which is called Terra FC and Earth FC globally, and it's about creating mass audience engagement to the millions before COP, where you go and sign a digital shirt and you demonstrate to those people attending COP that you are pro climate change and you want to see them take action and everything else, culminating in a game for Earth, which is Brazil versus the rest of the world, or Brazil versus Brazil in November at COP with all the mayors and with it's all very high efficacy as well, but going down to community level, engaging people in climate and environmental education through their football clubs, and involving the environment ministers and the sports ministers and everything else. And this is global as well, online. And then next year we're hoping to do a similar thing with the World Cup in football. So we are trying.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it. And on that note, finally, we're going to be, closing our evening. And we've overshot by 25 minutes. I'm sure it was engaging. That's why we overshot. But I really want to thank all of you for, coming down and sharing your stories and your time. I really appreciate that. And thank you all of you for sticking for 25 minutes extra. It speaks volumes, in terms of commitment to all of you. Thank you. Have a good evening.